The last statement. It was on the 23rd of November in the third year of the Genbun era, 1738. In Osaka, a public notice was posted that the sailor Katsuraya Tarohei was to be displayed for 3 days at Kizugawaguchi before being executed. The city was abuzz with talk of Tarohei, but his family, who should have felt the most profound grief, had been living in seclusion for almost 2 full years, cut off from all contact with the world, in their home near Hori Bridge in the southern district. The bearer of this expected news to the Katsuraya household was the mother of Tarohei's wife, who lived not far away in Hirono-maki. In the Katsuraya household, they called this elderly woman with her white hair grandmother from Hirono-maki. This nickname had been given to her by the 5 children in the Katsuraya house, who were always fond of the nice gifts she brought them, and soon both the master and mistress of the house started calling her grandmother as well. The 5 grandchildren adored their grandmother, sought her affection, and pestered her for things. 4 of them had been born during the 16 years since she had sent her daughter, who was then 17, to marry into the Katsuraya household. The eldest daughter, Ichi, was now 16, and the second daughter, Matsu, was 14. After them came Chotaro, a 12-year-old boy whom Tarohei had adopted as an infant from his wife's family with the intention of eventually marrying him off to one of his daughters. Then there was Toku, the 8-year-old daughter, and finally Hatsugoro, the first son born to Tarohei, who was 6 years old. The grandmother's family in Hirono-maki was wealthy, so her gifts had always pleased the grandchildren. However, ever since Tarohei's imprisonment 2 years ago, those gifts had become more practical, and the children often felt disappointed. This was because the grandmother had started bringing things for the household's daily needs, resulting in fewer toys and sweets. However, the vitality of children, who are just beginning to grow, is strong. They soon became accustomed not only to the decline in their grandmother's gifts but also to their mother's ill temper. Without showing any particular signs of being downcast, they continued their lively lives as usual, constantly alternating between little quarrels and little reconciliations. In place of their father, who had been explained to them as having gone far, far away and would never return, they eagerly welcomed their grandmother's visits. In contrast, ever since the misfortune had struck, Tarohei's wife, overwhelmed by the same persistent feelings of regret and grief, was unable to accept anything else into her heart. She hardly expressed any gratitude toward her mother, who came regularly to care for her and kindly offer comfort. Whenever her mother visited, she would be sent home after listening to the same repeated complaints. At the beginning of the hardship, Tarohei's wife would stare blankly, mechanically attending to her children's meals without eating much herself, saying repeatedly that she was thirsty, and sipping a little hot water. At night, although she would fall into a deep sleep from exhaustion, she often woke up, sighed, and sometimes got up to sew in the middle of the night. In such moments, the first to notice would be Hatsugoro, her 4-year-old son, followed by Toku, who was 6. When called by her children, she would return to bed, soothe them until they fell asleep again, and then lie there wide-eyed, sighing deeply once more. A few days later, she finally began to confide in her mother, who had been staying over, complaining and crying. Over the course of the next 2 years, Tarohei's wife continued her mechanical daily routines, repeating the same complaints and shedding the same tears. On the day the notice was posted, her mother came in the afternoon and told her that Tarohei's fate had been decided. However, contrary to her mother's fears, Tarohei's wife was not shocked. She merely listened, and then, as always, repeated the same complaints and cried. Her mother almost felt unsatisfied by the lack of a strong reaction. Meanwhile, their eldest daughter, Ichi, stood behind the sliding door, quietly listening to the conversation between her grandmother and mother. The misfortune that befell the Katsuraya household was as follows. Although the master, Tarohei, was a sailor by trade, he didn't sail himself. He owned a ship that traveled to the northern provinces, and he employed a man named Shinshi to handle the actual sailing while he ran the transport business. In Osaka, men like Tarohei were known as stay-at-home captains, while those who sailed the ships, like Shinshi, were referred to as offshore captains. In the autumn of the first year of the Genbun era, 1736, Shinshichi's ship set sail, carrying rice from Akita in Dewa province. Unfortunately, during the voyage, the ship encountered rough seas and was nearly wrecked, losing more than half of its cargo overboard. Shinshi sold the remaining rice, converted it into cash, and returned to Osaka. Upon his return, Shinshi told Tarohei that the shipwreck was well known in every port. He suggested that there was no need to return the money from the remaining cargo to the rice owners, and instead proposed using the funds to outfit another ship. Up until that point, Tarohei had run his business honestly, but having suffered a significant financial loss and now seeing the money in front of him, his moral compass faltered. He accepted the money. However, the rice owners in Akita, having heard about the shipwreck, also learned from various sources that there was remaining cargo and that someone had bought it. They sent someone to investigate the matter and even discovered the exact amount of money that had passed from Shinshi to Tarohei. The rice owners took the matter to court in Osaka. Shinshi fled, and Tarohei was imprisoned, eventually facing a death sentence. It was the night when the grandmother from Hironomaki came and told the frightening story that the eldest daughter, Ichi, overheard. After crying and repeating her usual complaints, the wife of the Katsuraya household fell into a deep sleep, exhausted. On either side of her slept Hatsugoro and Toku. Next to Hatsugoro slept Chotaro, and next to Toku was Matsu, with Ichi lying beside her. After a while, Ichi muttered something to herself under the covers. "Ah, yes, I'll do that. I'm sure I can do it," she seemed to say. Matsu overheard this and asked, "Sister, are you still awake? Don't speak too loudly." "I've thought of a good idea," Ichi said, first quieting her sister. Then, in a whisper, she explained her plan. Their father was going to be executed the day after tomorrow, but Ichi believed she could prevent it. She would write a petition and submit it to the magistrate. However, simply asking them not to kill their father wouldn't work. Instead, she would plead, "Save my father's life, but in exchange, please punish us children." If the magistrate agreed and their father was spared, that would be enough. Whether all the children would actually be killed, or whether only Ichi would die and the younger ones would be spared, was uncertain. However, when writing the petition, Ichi planned to ask that Chotaro not be included, as he wasn't their father's real child and therefore didn't need to die. Besides, their father had intended for Chotaro to inherit the household, so it would be better if he survived. Ichi explained all of this to her sister. "But it's scary," Matsu said. "Don't you want father to be saved?" "Of course, I want him to be saved." "Well then, all you need to do is follow me and do the same as I do. I'll write the petition tonight, and we'll take it early tomorrow morning." Ichi got up and began writing the petition in hiragana on sheets of paper that she used for her handwriting practice. The message was simple: they wanted their father's life spared, and in exchange, she, Matsu, Toku, and their brother Hatsugoro were willing to be punished, but they asked that Chotaro, who wasn't their father's real child, be forgiven. However, unsure of how to phrase it properly, she kept making mistakes, and by the time she finished, only a few sheets of clean paper remained. But at last, just as the first rooster crowed, the petition was complete. While Ichi was writing the petition, Matsu had fallen asleep, so Ichi quietly woke her up and had her change into her everyday clothes, which were folded next to her bedding. Then, Ichi prepared herself as well. The mother and Hatsugoro were still sleeping, unaware of what was happening, but Chotaro woke up and asked, "Sister, is it morning already?" Ichi whispered to him, "It's still early. You go back to sleep. Your sisters have something important to take care of for father, so we're quietly going out." "Then I want to come too," Chotaro said, sitting up. Ichi replied, "All right, get up. I'll help you with your clothes. Even though you're small, you're a boy, so it would be better if you came with us." Their mother, hearing the commotion as if in a dream, felt a bit uneasy and stirred in her sleep, but she didn't wake up. The three children slipped out of the house quietly, just as the second rooster crowed. Outside, it was a frosty dawn. Carrying a lantern, they came across an old night watchman striking his clappers. Ichi asked him, "How can we get to the magistrate's office?" The old man was kind and understanding, and he listened seriously to the children's story. He carefully explained how to get to the magistrate's office, where the monthly duty was being handled by the Western magistrate. At the time, the town magistrates were Inagaki Awaji no Kami Tananobu in the east and Sasa Matashiro Naruyuki in the west. Since it was November, the Western magistrate, Sasa, was on duty. As the old man was explaining, Chotaro, who had been listening, said, "I know that town." So, the siblings set off, with Chotaro leading the way. When they finally reached the Western magistrate's office, the gates were still closed. They approached the window of the gatekeeper's lodge, and Ichi repeatedly called out, "Excuse me, excuse me." After a while, the window slid open, and a man in his 40s peeked out. "What's all this noise? What do you want?" "I have a request for the magistrate," Ichi said, bowing politely. The man replied, "Yes," but he seemed unable to grasp the meaning of her words. Ichi repeated her request. The man appeared to understand at last and said, "Children cannot speak directly to the magistrate, your parents need to come forward." "No, my father is to be punished tomorrow, and I have a request regarding that," Ichi explained. "What? He's to be punished tomorrow? Then you must be the child of Katsuraya Tarohei." "Yes," Ichi answered. "Humph," the man said, thinking for a moment. Then he added, "How outrageous. It seems even the children do not fear their superiors. The magistrate will not see you. Go home, go home." With that, he closed the window. Matsu said to her sister, "Sister, since he scolded us like that, let's go home." Ichi replied, "Be quiet. Just because he scolded us doesn't mean we should leave. Just do as I say." Saying this, Ichi squatted down in front of the gate. Matsu and Chotaro followed her lead and squatted down as well. The three children waited for quite a while for the gate to open. At last, they heard the sound of the wooden beam being removed, and the gate swung open. It was the same man who had first shown his face through the window. As Ichi stepped forward into the gate, Matsu and Chotaro followed closely behind her. Because Ichi's demeanor was so composed, the gatekeeper didn't immediately try to stop them. He watched in amazement as the three children moved toward the entrance for a while, and finally returned to himself and called out, "Hey, hey." "Yes?" Ichi answered quietly, stopping and turning back. "Where are you going? Didn't I tell you to go home just now?" "Indeed you did, but we intend to stay until we have heard the response to our request." "Humph. Stubborn, are you? In any case, you must not go to such a place. Come over here." The children turned back and went to the gatekeeper's post. At the same time, 2 or 3 other guards came out from the entrance, saying, "What's going on? What's going on?" and surrounded the children. Ichi seemed to have anticipated this moment, crouching down there and pulling a written request from her pocket, which she immediately presented to the leading guard. Matsu and Chotaro also crouched down and bowed in unison. The guard, receiving the request, appeared uncertain about what to do next, silently looking down at Ichi's face. "Please," Ichi said. "These are the children of Katsuraya Tarohei, who has been exposed at Kizugawa-guchi," the gatekeeper explained from the side. "They say they are here to plead for their parents' life." The guard glanced at the other officers and said, "Then I will take this document and inquire about it." No one raised any objections. The guard took the request from Ichi's hand and entered the building. Sasa, the magistrate of the West Town, was a newcomer among the 2 magistrates and had been in Osaka for less than a year. He consulted all matters of duty with his fellow magistrate, Inagaki, and referred issues to the castle lord for handling. Because of this, he had been keeping a close eye on the public case of Tarohei of Katsuraya after receiving the report from the previous magistrate, and he felt as if a heavy burden had been lifted now that the execution procedures were finally completed. Then, this morning, a watchman reported that someone had come to plead for mercy. Sasa felt as if there was an interruption to the careful arrangements he had made. "What kind of person has come?" Sasa's voice was displeased. "The daughters and son of Tarohei have come. The older daughter wishes to present a petition, and I have it here. Would you like to see it?" Considering that a suggestion box has been established for that purpose, depending on the circumstances, it may be accepted. However, I must inform you that there are procedures for this. Anyway, if you have it, let's take a look at it. The watchman presented the petition before Sasa. Opening it, Sasa looked suspicious. The one named Ichi must be the older daughter. How old is she? I will not interrogate, but she appears to be around 14 or 15 years old. I see. Sasa stared at the document for a while. Although the handwriting was somewhat crude, the structure of the sentences was well organized, and it seemed unlikely that even an adult could write such a short text containing so much information easily. A thought crossed his mind that perhaps it had been written by an adult. He then wondered if it was the work of someone who had the audacity to deceive their superiors. After contemplating, he considered a possible course of action. Tarohei was to be displayed until tomorrow evening. There was still time before the execution was carried out. They could accept the petition or not during this time, consult with their colleagues, and refer to their superiors. Even if there were emotional considerations during that period, it would be possible to investigate while going through the proper procedures. In any case, Sasa thought to send the children back. Then, the officer said to the guards, "I have reviewed this petition, but it will not be submitted to the magistrate. Tell them to take it back and submit it to the town elder." The guard reported to Sasa that he had tried to send the children home, but they refused to leave. Sasa instructed him to offer them some sweets to entice them to go home, and if that didn't work, to force them to return. After the guard left, the chief magistrate, Odabisha no Kami Sukiharu, visited. He was not there for an official inspection but for personal business. After finishing his business, Sasa informed him about the recent events and expressed his thoughts, seeking his guidance. Since Oda had no particular objections, he agreed with Sasa's plan to convene a meeting in the afternoon with the East Town Magistrate, Inagaki, and 5 town elders to discuss summoning the children of Tarohei of Katsuraya. Sasa's concerns about the possibility of deception were deemed reasonable, so they decided to prepare interrogation tools in the courtroom. This was a means to intimidate the children into confessing. Just as this discussion concluded, the previous guard returned, having observed the situation at the entrance. "How is it? Did the children go home?" Sasa called out. "Yes, indeed," the guard replied. "I tried to send them off with some sweets, but the girl named Ichi would not listen at all. In the end, she stuffed the petition into her pocket and was forcibly taken home." The younger girl cried softly, but Ichi returned without shedding a tear. "She seems to be quite a determined girl," Oda remarked, glancing at Sasa. On the 24th of November, during the Hour of the Sheep, the courtyard of the Nishi-machi magistrate's office presented a lively scene. In the showing, both magistrates were seated in a row. At the back, a separate seat had been set up, where the castle governor was observing the interrogation proceedings. On the Ingawa veranda, the appointed yoriki, subordinate officials, sat with the shuyaku, scribes, accompanying them. In the garden, where the doshin, constables, stood with their 3 tools in hand, an array of torture devices was laid out. At that moment, 5 town elders arrived, leading the wife of Katsuraya Tarohei and their 5 children. The interrogation began with the wife. However, when asked her name and age, she only managed a brief response. When further questions were posed, she could only say, "I don't know at all" or "I'm sorry," without making any substantial statements. Next, the eldest daughter, Ichi, was questioned. Though she appeared a bit younger than her 16 years, she was a slender little girl. However, she displayed no signs of fear and provided a full account of events. She recounted how she had overheard her grandmother's story, how she had thought about making a request after going to bed at night, how she confided in her younger sister Matsu and encouraged her, how she wrote the application herself, how she allowed her brother Taro to join them when he woke up, how she asked for directions after hearing the name of the magistrate's office, how she interacted with the gatekeeper upon arriving, how she requested that the application be relayed to the yoriki, and finally, how she was forced to return by the yoriki after they insisted she leave. She answered all questions clearly regarding the events of the previous day. "Then you haven't consulted with anyone else besides Matsu?" asked the interrogator. "I haven't spoken to anyone else. I haven't even told Taro the details. I only said I was going to ask for help for our father. After we returned from the office and met with the town elders, I told them that we would offer our lives in exchange for our father's assistance, and Taro then said he wanted to offer his life as well. Ultimately, he had me write an application just for himself, and he brought it with him," Ichi stated. After Ichi made this declaration, Taro took out a written document from his pocket. Under the instructions of the interrogator, the doshin received the document from Taro one by one and brought it to the Ingawa. The interrogator opened it and compared it to Ichi's application. Ichi's application had been submitted before the interrogation began, handed over from the town elder. In Long Taro's application, he wrote in the same handwriting as the previous application that he wanted to die in place of his father, along with his sister and siblings. The interrogator called out, "Matsu." However, Matsu did not notice that she had been called. When Ichi said, "They called for you," Matsu timidly lifted her bowed head for the first time and looked at the official above on the porch. "You want to die with your sister, don't you?" the interrogator asked. Matsu replied, "Yes," and nodded. Next, the interrogator called out, "Long Taro." Long Taro immediately responded, "Yes. You want to die with your siblings, just as it is written in your application, don't you?" "I can't live while everyone else dies," Long Taro replied clearly. The interrogator then called, "Toku." Toku realized that he was called this time after his sister and brother had been called in order. He simply stared wide-eyed at the official's face. Are you also okay with dying? As Toku silently gazed at the official, the color drained from his lips, and tears filled his eyes. Shogoro, the interrogator called. The youngest, Shogoro, who was just about 6 years old, looked silently at the official's face. When asked, "What about you? Are you going to die?" he vigorously shook his head. The people in the room couldn't help but smile at this. At this moment, Sasa stepped forward to the edge of the room and called, "Ichi." "Yes," she replied. "There is no falsehood in your statement, is there? If there is even the slightest mistake in what you've said, or if you've been taught or consulted with anyone, speak up now. If you hide it and don't tell the truth, you'll be made to confess the truth using the instruments lined up over there," Sasa said, pointing to the tools of punishment. Ichi glanced at the direction indicated and, without wavering at all, replied firmly, "No, there are no mistakes in what I've said." Her eyes were cold, and her words were calm. "Then let me ask you one more thing. If you are to be your father's substitutes, you will be killed immediately. You will not be able to see your father's face, but is that acceptable to you?" "That is fine," came the response, in the same cool tone, but after a brief pause, as if something had occurred to her, she added, "Surely, there can be no mistake about the will of the authorities." On Sasa's face, there appeared a look of shock, as if taken by surprise, but it quickly vanished, replaced by a gaze that turned sharply towards Ichi. It could be described as a look of astonished hatred. However, Sasa said nothing. Then Sasa whispered something to the interrogator, and soon the interrogator announced to the town elders, "Your business is concluded, so you may take your leave." Watching the children leave the courtroom, Sasa turned to Oda and Inagaki, saying, "What a terrifying situation we have ahead of us." In his heart, there was no lingering trace of the pitiful filial daughter, nor of the foolish children who had been incited by others. Only the last words of Ichi echoed coldly, as sharp as a blade. It was not surprising that officials of the Tokugawa government around the Genbun era were unaware of the foreign term martyr and that contemporary dictionaries lacked a translation for self-sacrifice. They did not know that there exists a force in the human spirit, irrespective of age or gender, that could manifest itself in the daughter of a condemned man like Tarohei. Yet the hidden edge of rebellion within self-sacrifice pierced not only Sasa, who exchanged words with Ichi, but also the hearts of all the officials present in the courtroom. Both the castle governor and the two magistrates felt that Ichi was a strange girl, and there was even a superstition that something might be possessing her. Consequently, their sympathy for the filial daughter was weak. However, the primitive institutions of administrative justice at that time naturally went into action, and Ichi's wishes were unexpectedly fulfilled. The execution of Katsuraya Tarohei's sentence was postponed with the reason given as awaiting instructions from Edo. This notification was delivered to the town elders on the following day, November 25th. Then, on March 2nd of the 4th year of Genbun, it was announced that due to the Daijosai ceremony being conducted in Kyoto, the deadline for the execution could not be met. As a result, Tarohei's death penalty was commuted, and he was to be exiled from Osaka, covering the north, south, and Tenma districts. The Katsura family was once again summoned to the West Magistrate's office, where they were able to say goodbye to their father. The Daijosai ceremony had been interrupted since the grand ceremony conducted by Emperor Higashiyama in the 4th year of Jokyo. Before the placard regarding Tarohei's case was posted on November 23 of the 3rd year of Genbun, it had been 51 years since Emperor Sakuramachi held it on the 19th of the same month.